Alright, it's John Diz MMA, and we got the biggest what ifs in UFC history. We're going to kick it off with what if Petr Yan never threw that knee against Aljamain Sterling? And in my opinion, if he doesn't throw that knee, he becomes the bantamweight GOAT and is easily a lock for a top 15 fighter ever. Now, to give some background going into the Aljamain Sterling fight, he was undefeated in the UFC, and he was coming off of a dominant win over Jose Aldo that ended with him securing the finish in the 5th round via TKO. Then in his fight with Aljamain, basically he's dominating the whole fight, looking great. Stalls Aljo out, has him on one knee, just kind of sitting there holding his forehead down. Sits there for like 10 seconds, and then out of nowhere throws this knee that gets him disqualified and gets Aljamain the win. So obviously if he doesn't throw that knee, he wins that fight clearly. And this would have been a really good win since Aljo was a surging contender who was coming off a really good submission over Corey Sandhagen. And then just combining Yan and Aljamain's timeline, I think Yan's reign would have gone something like this. Yan would have defended his belt against Corey Sandhagen, where there's no reason to think he wouldn't beat him again. As when this actually did happen, Yan whooped up on that ass. I think he'd have his way with TJ. You know, Yan's just such a better striker than TJ, and he still has the ability to mix in the grappling if he needed to. And see, at this point, it's kind of hard to keep track of their careers, but I think at this point, Aljamain would have gotten booked against maybe Marlon Moraes, and that would have gotten him back into the title picture with a win. Cutting back to Yan, him and Henry Cejudo had a beef that even got physical at the UFC PI. Not to mention, Cejudo said a ton of times that he would love to fight Yan, but Yan didn't have the belt at that time because he lost to Aljo. So if these two guys fought, if Cejudo and Yan fight, I think Yan's 100% win. I think he just fucking schools him on the feet, and then I don't think Cejudo would be able to work in his takedowns and really control Yan at all. And so at this point, I think Aljo would have beat two guys ranked below him, maybe a Marlon Moraes and a Chito Vera, and earned a title shot. At this point, Merab would have also earned a title shot by fighting whoever outside of Yan to get to the belt, you know what I mean? Because Merab, he ain't losing to anyone outside the top of the top. And then you still have O'Malley, who the UFC would obviously like to fast track to the top. Maybe they do with a fun fight with Jose Aldo, trying to build his legacy. And see, this creates like a logjam weird situation as Aljo and Merab won't fight each other because of their friendship. But the UFC is going to do everything in their power not to give Sean such a hard matchup if it's not for the belt. So I think this is what the UFC would do. I think they'd offer Aljo and Merab a title eliminator fight. And when they refuse, because, you know, they're friends, then the UFC would use that as an excuse to fuck them over and then give Sean a title shot. And if they give Sean a title shot, I think he loses. This is the real fight with Yan. Yan got robbed. Yan definitely won 2 rounds. And this would have been a 5-round fight. You know what I'm saying? Everyone knows that Yan gets better as the fight goes on. I have no idea why you would pick Sean in that fight. So Yan has now beat O'Malley, and they want to keep Yan as a star instead of a boring grappler like Aljo or Merab. And so I think the UFC at that time would believe that Merab was the easier matchup. So they would book Merab versus Yan and give Aljo a future title shot or a big fight or some other shit. Promise him a fight, good fight at 145 or something. Once Yan fights Merab, I think this is where his title run comes to an end. I think it would play out similar to how their fight would go, and I think Merab would just demolish him with his pace for 25 minutes. So I know this is a big old hypothetical, but in this realistic hypothetical, Yan would have beat Aljamain, Sandhagen, TJ Dillashaw, Cejudo, and Sean O'Malley. In my opinion, this resume is just such a stacked resume and so good. With only 1 loss to Merab, I think that would definitely put him above Dominic Cruz and therefore into my kind of top 10, top 15 GOAT list. And if you want to see where my other guys are, check out my GOAT list rank. So yeah, another one was kind of weird because I threw out a lot of hypotheticals there, but I think it's a realistic path where Yan is if he doesn't lose his belt originally to Aljo. Alright, next one's going to be Khabib, but it's not going to be the common what if Khabib didn't retire. You know, a lot of people think this dude retired because his dad died, which is true, but the end goal was always to retire. He would have done that. They've been talking about it for years. Actually, back in an interview in 2019 with RT Sports, Khabib's dad says that once Khabib got the #1 pound for pound and got the UFC title undefeated, he would retire from the sport and then give Islam a chance to do the same. And funnily enough, going into that Gaethje fight, Khabib was ranked number 2, and after beating Gaethje, he was promoted to number 1 on the pound for pound list, which if you're following that timeline correctly, would have meant he retired anyway. So instead, we'll do what if Khabib and Tony fought. As you know, Khabib and Tony was booked and canceled 5 freaking times. Ain't that crazy? And each time it was canceled, I think Tony had less and less of a chance of winning. This was because their first fight was supposed to be the TUF 22 finale, which was scheduled for December 11, 2015. At that time, Khabib was only 26, while Tony was 31 and in his physical prime. Khabib was coming off a really dominant win over RDA, where he easily won 3 rounds, and some people could even argue a 10-8 in the last round. While Tony, on the other hand, was coming off a bloody war where he submitted Edson Barboza in the second. You know, this was a good win. And in my opinion, I think this may have been Tony's absolute prime outside of maybe the Kevin Lee fight, you could argue. So going into this fight, it 100% is the closest out of all 5, going into the first fight that got booked. And in my opinion, I'd still definitely pick Khabib. You know, he would have been able to take Tony down at will. And the thing is, Khabib never really put himself in the guard, and he never shot in a way that Tony could do a Darce choke on him. So this was just a horrible style matchup for Tony. I think it's one of the worst ones you could ever give him. And you know, you've already seen this, like guys like Danny Castillo was holding Tony down and easily controlling him just a year before this fight would have taken place. And Khabib, while he is a lot more sloppy on the feet, I think once he got that fight to the ground, which I 100% think he would have, I think he would have just bounced Tony's head off the canvas. And as I'm sure you can put together, I think every fight after this would just become more and more lopsided as Khabib just got better with time and Tony just digressed. Khabib was also entering his physical prime while Tony was also leaving it. And I think this would have been shown most clearly in their final fight, which was scheduled for April 18th, 2020. Khabib was coming off a dominant finish over Dustin Poirier to defend his belt, while Tony, on the other hand, was coming off a doctor stoppage win over the Cam Man fucking Cowboy Cerrone. You know, I'm kind of just trolling with that one, but at the same time, are we really going to compare Cowboy to Dustin? Like, those wins do not compare at all. And Tony, you know, even in the Cowboy fight, I think you can see Tony's decline. You know, he looked a lot, just watch that fight, he looked a lot slower and he looked a lot stiffer, a lot more hittable, less fluid, which is why a guy like Justin Gaethje ended up just fucking brutalizing him. So if this fight took place, Khabib would have been in his physical prime, being 31 years old, while Tony was declining, already being at the age of 36, which is old for the lightweight division. As a matter of fact, it's so old, unless Dustin Poirier breaks this curse, no lightweight has fucking won a belt at the age of 35 or above. So, you know, Tony was old. Not only that, but Khabib's striking and especially his offensive wrestling submissions were the best they ever were. This was his absolute best. At this point in his career, Khabib would have easily taken Tony down and just dominated him from top position. I think he gets the sub, or I think he gets a TKO early into that fight. To wrap this one up, I basically think that Khabib always would have won, but Tony had the best chance earlier on, and the more and more this fight got canceled and pushed back, the more it screwed Tony, because then I don't think he ever had a chance. One of the most hyped Russian prospects who never fought enough for the UFC, you know, he was known to have a little bit of card issues, but it's a shame that you just think I was going to say Zabit? No, fucking course not. Everyone knows about Zabit. Instead, we're talking about Khamzat, the real Russian with fucking cardio issues. All right, my what if is, what if Khamzat was an active fighter? And in my opinion, I think he could have been a 2-division champ. You know, nowadays people disrespect Khamzat, say he's overrated, you know, say he has zero cardio, like I just made the joke. But this isn't even the case now, and especially back then when he first made his UFC debut, no one was saying this shit. You know, his first UFC fight ended in a dominant submission, which he would follow with a first-round KO in his second fight just 10 days later. This dude literally fought 10 days after his UFC debut. And right after this, Khamzat pace slowed down with him waiting over a year in between his fight with GM3 Gerald Mearshart and Ling Jiang. And you'll notice the reason for all these gaps in his fighting career is because he can only fight in Abu Dhabi cards. He has a lot of issues fighting in the US because he's best friends with a fucking dictator. This is the Chechen dictator Ramzan Kadyrov. And don't get this confused, I'm not hating with Khamzat. He's really just in a shitty position, because what are you going to do? Go out against your dictator of your country? Be like, nah, fuck this dude's crazy. And then risk having your family or, you know, there being a bomb in your own car when you go to start that shit up. But obviously you can't do that. But because of that, he can't fight in the US. So he has to fight on these shitty Abu Dhabi cards, which happen, you know, once a year. But then after that, he fought Gilbert Burns. And there's this whole misconception of, like, this is where the hype train ended, which is just wrong. You know, Gilbert was the number 2 ranked welterweight in the world, only behind Colby Covington and Usman, who was like number 1 pound for pound at that time. And, you know, that fight with Gilbert Burns, it was a war, it was a competitive fight, but Khamzat still clearly won 2 rounds, which should have earned him a title shot at welterweight. I don't know how it doesn't. You know, you're this undefeated prospect, you go out there, you beat Gilbert Burns, but instead the UFC was like, nah, you gotta do one more thing. You gotta go out there and butcher Nate Diaz in his retirement fight, so we won't re-sign this fucker. However, in that fight, Khamzat missed weight, you know, it goes viral. He's flipping the people off because he's like 8 pounds overweight and he just doesn't give a fuck. He fights a replacement Kelvin Holland, makes obviously easy work of him. But because of this, the UFC wouldn't give him a title shot because they weren't sure if he'd be able to make 170. Which I think he would. He had already made it like 5 times. This was just a one-time fuck-up in my book. But regardless, the UFC kicks him out, makes him go up to 185. Because of this and his travel issues, you know, it's over a year before his next fight because he also has to properly bulk up. You know, this is his fight where Usman, where a lot of people think he quote-unquote gasses out. No, he doesn't gas out. I hate to break it to you. What happens is he goes in there, 10-8 Usman in the first round, and breaks his hand, which stops him from putting as much out. Like, to all the people saying he gassed out, he was throwing more in the second than Usman, secured a takedown in the second, and in the third, threw almost as much as Usman, threw a little bit less, but he was shot 4 takedowns and secured 1. This is another thing with Khamzat. This dude's so good, they compared the first round and they say, no, he gasses out. Meanwhile, In the second and third, he had a good pace. It's just in the first, he put on a Superman pace. So obviously, when you compare it to that, anything's going to look like gassing out. And this is just another thing with Khamzat's career. If this dude doesn't go out there and perform like fucking Superman against the best of the best of the best, people are going to say he's a fraud, checked and overhyped and all this bullshit. My whole thing is if Khamzat was active, I think he easily could have been a welterweight and middleweight champ. And this is kind of because I think he goes out there and whoever you put in front of him, he beats for the most part. Yes, I think he would beat Sean Strickland. I think he'd beat Leon Edwards. I think he could beat Duplessis. I think he could beat Adesanya. The problem is because of all this bullshit with the dictator and all this, he doesn't fight enough to earn the title shot. He can't string enough contender wins together to get there, but if he ever got there, I'm 100% confident he would win. And I think a lot of people are going to change their mind on Khamzat when this dude fucking runs through Robert Whittaker and just drops a dub on him. Gonna be the end of the video though. Shout out to Thought GNU for the video suggestion. My bad if this is coming out late. I've been a little bit busy for the few days, but got finals, but then, graduated out of high school so then I can put out some more videos. Thank you so much, boys. We hit 1K subs, so I'm thinking of doing something special for that, so I still gotta put that out. Comment if you got any video ideas. If not, thank you so much. It is John is MMA. See you boys next time.